Scott. And there's many, many cameras. Which one is the camera that I will be looking into? It's that one. No? It's that one. Both. Oh, this is wide. This one is wide, the middle one.
Are we connected to the Wi-Fi? Yeah. So it's already connected to the Wi-Fi? It's already recording? Okay. Hey!
Shall we?
Just share the link.
It's interesting how a brand can own like a statement. Now every time I hear "shall we," I think of Gordon's.
Why?
They owned the statement.
They owned it.
Shall we? Now every time I hear it,
start.
Hello and welcome to this conversation on the rising tensions about activism in Uganda, particularly online. I mean, what is the place of activism? What is its role? Is it more performative than it is functional? We're going to get into all of that. My name is Fiona Kemijisha and I'm the CEO at Kama Digital Content Hub. I'm also a digital content creator and I have the privilege of being Switzerland. I'll be Switzerland today, okay? If you've been on X in the past couple of weeks, I'm Switzerland and this is, you'll name them. So I'll let the two gentlemen beside me introduce themselves. They don't need much introduction, at least if you're Ugandan. Mm-hmm. So let me start with the gentleman to my left.
Well, hello Fiona, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Always a pleasure. My name is James Onen, also known as Fat Boy. I'm the host of the Fat Boy Show on RX Radio. I have a long career in traditional FM radio, which I exited 5 years ago to start my independent journey in the online space. And the internet is now my home, as it is the home for many people now. Mm-hmm. The internet is also now where many of today's wars are being fought. Mm-hmm. I found myself embroiled in one of those wars over the past few weeks. And so it is what leads us to have this conversation
You know
today.
Intimately about that, don't you? About online wars. Yeah. Welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And on my right?
Thank you so much. My name is Raymond Mujuni. I am an idle and disorderly person. I was amused by some of the things that James Onen said, and I felt I made a deduction in that moment that he could take some of the ridicule that I was going to throw at him, and I threw it at him, and
here we are.
I achieved some of the intention that I had, and here we are. But you should have sat here because you're the right thinking, I'm the left thinking. So you're the right and conservative. This should have been his seat.
Oh, but is that your ideological dispensation?
I do not have I am somewhere closer to the center than many people would imagine.
So you'd say center left?
It's a spectrum? There are some ideas on the left that are appealing to me, but I abhor many of them.
Okay.
So you're not one to be put in a box?
No. It's
before we get into a whole other conversation, I see where this is going, but I do think that's more of a spectrum, isn't it? You kind of, you know what I mean? But let's get into the conversation, but not before I just say a couple of thank yous to the people who have helped us make this happen, live stream this, give us a space. First is MCI Media Hub, which is where we are. Thank you so much for the space. It's a collaborative workspace, so if you're looking for a space to work in, this is home. Media Challenge Initiative, which offers professional media production services and event space and training of the next generation of reporters and TV journalists. If that's you, again, this would be the plug. And Switch Africa, a Pan-African youth-centered social newsroom. Also, RX Radio, which is a Uganda-based digital radio platform, which is targeting you, aims at entertaining you, the consumer who is looking for quality radio content. And Kama Digital Content Hub, where I have the pleasure of serving. We exist to just make sure that Ugandan digital creators are skilled appropriately so they can go out there and make some money. Now, as we dive into this conversation, I don't want to assume that everybody who's watching knows where we started from. Some of you do they still say tweeps? I don't know if we still say tweeps. I have been off Twitter for a long time, but I won't assume that everybody knows where this conversation started from. So allow me to sort of set the stage before we dive in. Now, a lot of us are familiar, probably all of us are familiar with the finance bill protests in Kenya in 2024. And that started, it lit a fire online and civil society everywhere, about the importance of protests, the importance of the voices of young people in impacting change. And that in no small way inspired the march to parliament here in Uganda. Now, when that happened, or at least when that was about to happen, there was so much talk on social media. Civil society was unequivocally saying, you know what, this is your right. You guys have the right to be out here in the streets demanding for what you want. And there were, contrary voices, such as James's, that were saying, you know what, no, we're discouraging this. You're putting the youth in the line of fire, and a couple of other things. And coming from that, now let's just fast forward. A couple of months later, Ms. Agatha Tuhaire, who is a lawyer, journalist, and respected member of the activism space in Uganda, protested against the arrest of Dr. Kiza Besige's lawyer. And once she was arrested, a certain tweet, well, a couple of tweets were made by James, just commenting on the situation. And one of the things he said, and I quote, is that it was a photo op. He'll say more. It was a photo op, and generally implying that there was more of a performative aspect to that, but not just to that isolated event, activism in general. On the other hand, when Mr. when Mr. Kataha came into the conversation, he wrote what can only be described as a massive thread. He wrote a massive thread saying absolutely not. And just to summarize it, he was saying, no, the civil society and activism in particular is really important to the creation of a society that is good, that is energizing, that community of people who want to see better here in Uganda. So I want to just dive into the deep end and just start with, James, what's your beef with activism?
Well, first, I want to make clear that in principle, activism, I think, can be a noble endeavor. I just find it to be fraught with so much opportunity for dishonesty and self-interest. And that's where I find that a lot of the activism that takes place in Uganda skews in that direction, as manifested by many of the primary actors that we interact with on social media. So, I mean, it's not lost on us that, the activism space is a very competitive one. It is one where there appears to be an interest in status, and there are some material incentives that fuel the desire to be a prominent activist, and not just limited to political activism. We see this in every other sphere of activism, whether it's women's activism, environmentalism. So mostly you have sort of the so-called activist role-playing the part of an activist. The goal is to be seen to be an activist and then sort of position yourself to obtain all the perks that come with it, the travel, the scholarships, the funding, the grants, and so forth. In Uganda, it's almost a trope at this point that we view the NGO sector, the advocacy sector with a lot of skepticism, because we know that this is an area where people mostly go to enrich themselves. Now, where there are honest players, unfortunately, they get caught up in a lot of, you could argue that they may be unfairly bundled with the other less scrupulous ones. However, when we see them behaving in ways that mimic the behavior of the less scrupulous ones, we kind of have to call it out. So that is where I find myself and others. I also do find that it ends up being mostly performative and not really results-oriented. The goal being, hey, look at me, I'm speaking for you, I'm your hero, I'm fighting, you're not, so I'm more special than you. Meanwhile, we're not actually seeing any real change on the ground. And this comes at the expense of the other activists in some cases who are actually doing the groundwork, maybe behind the scenes, maybe collaborating with whom the performative activists would call enemies, right? So they will say, don't ever talk to the other side. If we ever heard you met with anyone on the other side, you're an enemy, you're a collaborator, you're in their pocket. Meanwhile, those are the kinds of activists that tend to get things done because, the real world is messy. You're going to have to make deals behind, sometimes in front, and sometimes you have to shake hands with your enemy, and a lot of times that's how you get results. But if you want to stand on a high horse and be like, hey, I'm going to be a purist, those are the enemies, never deal with them, watch me scream and holler about human rights, all the while accomplishing nothing, that's where my beef with modern activism comes from, and it's what has inspired much of my commentary on the matter in the past couple of months. And I'll just add one more point, if you'll allow me.
Yeah.
Where it gets to the part where their advocacy extends to encouraging others to put themselves in harm's way, at that point it becomes more nefarious. It's your right to demonstrate, get out there, it's your voice, don't let the government stop you from saying what you want to say, all the while knowing that in a country like this, doing so will almost always lead to an altercation with police, which can often lead to a violent arrest or even worse. Now, we hate that that happens. We hate that we live in a country where they don't really respect people's right of protest, but it is what it is. So if you're going to be the one to say, well, go out and protest anyway, then you be the one leading the charge. Quite often they're not. They're content to sit back and tweet from their lounges and homes and offices and let other people's kids do the dirty work. They'll come in to sweep up the mess afterwards, providing consultancy and legal service while presenting themselves as, the primary actors in all of this. I find it to be extremely shady, and so that's where a lot of my commentary has come from.
Okay, we're going to revisit a couple of those, but first let me go over to Raymond and ask the same question, but the reverse. I'm asking him, what is his beef with activism? What for you, like even just inspiring that massive tweet thread, what for you is the reason why activism is so important?
So I think that, and James is laboring under a latitude of so many imperceptible premises, and that's the problem. Is not the activism. You've got to understand where we've come from as a country, and I think one of the things you said is that there's no real change happening on the ground. In around 1870s, the British came here. They came with the King's African Rifles, parked the King's African Rifles outside Buganda Kingdom, and told them, here is an agreement which says 80% of your land belongs to the crown, 20% of that belongs to you. You are free to sign it, but if you do not sign it, the Nubian King's African Rifles you see out there are going to come and shoot you. In the immediate, there's very little that the Buganda Kingdom could do. The kings deducing there and saying, our people could be killed, our entire heritage could be wiped away. They signed that agreement. As a cascade, Toro signed the same agreement, Bunyoro signed the same agreement, and Uganda came under a protectorate. This is the foundational block on which we find ourselves with this society called Uganda. We didn't wish, first there's a geographical mistake that we were all in the same place, but very different in terms of tribe and ethnicity. I mean, James Onen and I, between our homes could be almost 600 kilometers of work. We don't speak the same language, we don't have the same culture and heritage, so the things that would have brought us together were very minimal. But does that mean that we couldn't relate with each other? I don't think. We could have related with each other with or without a protectorate in place. Now, that protectorate was first fought. It was fought with guns, it was fought with pangas, it was fought with spears, and some other people felt they could fight it in the boardrooms, other people felt that, we can negotiate it away. In 1962, a combination of factors came together to say that, one, it was unsustainable to have a colony in Uganda. Two, people were actually clamoring for an actual freedom. And that protectorate ended, and we got ourselves an independent Uganda. What had been land rights, which had been claimed by the British, then were reverted back to the people. A combination of factors is responsible for that. What you see, we are in Tirupati Mall. Nobody stops to ask, how did Mr. Tirupati, all the way from India, have the money to have a building here? All of these are historical justices or injustices that were meted out on natives and locals here, which were never corrected. And part of the corrective action now is that we are in a community and a society where we're trying to correct that. Now, I wanted to come closer to the activism, which is, in 62, we set out with a constitution that said we are one and the same, but the military should not be part of our politics. If you have a disagreement with someone, you'll sort it out in the Parliament of Uganda. If you can't get it through the Parliament of Uganda, you could go to the street and inspire mass protest to bring it about. There were movements here of activists from as early as the 1800s, even into the 1990s. The Bataka movement is a perfect example of that. People who fought and died on the streets for what we enjoy today, just the basic idea that you can buy a piece of land in Kampala and have a land title. Someone fought and died for that. Another person negotiated that in a boardroom. Their combined efforts, their collective efforts led us to where we are today. Now, that constitution was wished away because the then Apollo Milton Obote didn't like the king of Buganda at the time, who was the executive, and bombed his palace and took it over. Guess who he sent to bomb the palace and take it over? Idi Amin Dada. 4 years after that, Idi Amin Dada pointed the same guns at Obote and chased him out of Uganda, took a coup d'etat. We went through 8 years of people being killed under no law. The Constitution was wished away. We went into a lawless place where decrees were what determined whether you lived or died. Now, years of fighting and sacrifice got us out of that. You cannot imagine how many people died to bring us the 1995 Constitution, which currently activists are using to protest. You cannot fathom the number of people that dreamed over Uganda that they didn't get into. And the idea that this constitutive thing called a constitution, and it gives us breathing rights, freedoms of association, expression, that's a beating idea in the heart of everyone who is politically alert and alive. So that constitution says you can go out and protest, you can assemble. We've assembled here. This is a form of activism. You can't wish it away. Are we here for fiduciary incentive? Maybe not. I don't know if I'm going to get paid for this. I don't want to get paid for it. But the living and beating heart of me is that so many people died for this constitution to be written the way it's written. I can't let them down. Now, the classic example of that is a military court-martial. No one contests whether, if the government has a case against Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, he's a civilian. The courts of law are open. Go to the courts of law, file your case there, bring your best prosecutors, prosecute him. If you have the evidence, in 2 weeks you should actually be able to put him away. But you get a civilian who is a political actor and put him in a general court-martial, which is a court-martial that is reserved for a disciplinary committee of the army. So imagine a disciplinary committee of RX Radio trying to determine whether Raymond should be able to speak or not. I don't belong to RX Radio. And that way, I can't get justice in an RX Radio disciplinary committee because the immediate constitutive element, which is being a member, I'm not a member. So Kizza Besigye is not a member of the UPDF. And he doesn't deserve to be in that court. And it's not just that we love Kizza Besigye or not. I might disagree a lot with Kizza Besigye on a lot of things. But that the aspect of having a civilian in a military court-martial, that itself violates a constitution which people fought blood and born for to get. Now, a lawyer who goes to represent Kizza Besigye at that gets summarily sentenced to 9 months in prison. That is the, if you could ever hold up a middle finger to a constitution, that was the ultimate middle finger. And I felt like, okay, I can understand. I won't go to the streets to protest this. But I can see that this is a grave injustice. And in my line of work, I would, when I was still a journalist, I would write about it extensively. When I was still a columnist, I would have written about the boring nature of having civilians tried in a general court-martial. I'm not doing that anymore. But here are people who are really well-meaning individuals. Agatha is both a lawyer and a journalist of great repute. She could have sat in the newsroom. She'd be earning top dollar. She'd be driving a Mercedes-Benz whether she wanted to or not. As a lawyer, she's a graduate lawyer, graduated LDC, and she is a damn fine one at that too. So she could have done any of that, and it would have been okay for her. She'd have lived in life for that. But she was out there to say, look here, listen to the things that put us in a constitutive element called this 1995 Constitution. Otherwise, if you do not listen to things like this, we go back to the 66, we go back to the 71 where people were just getting killed. Now, many of us who try to avoid that Uganda really work day and night to make sure that that catastrophe is averted. We have a constitution that reads, the immediate first page of a constitution reads like a post-traumatic stress incident that a therapist said, recalling that you had this historic incident where grave injustice was committed, committing myself to never seeing you in that state. So that we were traumatized by our history so much that we were not willing to see the future. We just decided in the Constitution, let's not look at the future. Let's just not do the things we did in the past. Mm-hmm. And that's the Constitution that we live under currently. So unfortunately, now we're doing things that we did in the past. And people like Agatha are just holding up the flag and saying, this is a red flag moment. You really deserve to see it for what it is. Now, when I saw James's tweet, it was a combination of factors. It was first that I don't know if I should say this, but I was in court standing surety for Agatha when I saw your tweet. Agatha is known to me for almost 10 years. I know her children. I know her home. Her children play with my children. If her freedom is taken away, I feel a certain way. I feel like the collective community should come together. And if you are taking her freedom like legally and lawfully, I would understand that. But this wasn't a legal and lawful way to take away someone's freedom. So I finished the court process, and I was so angry at that tweet. And I thought to myself, if you respond in anger, you're very likely not going to be of use. And I told James, I'm coming back for this at 2 p.m. tomorrow.
I saw that.
At 2 p.m. tomorrow.
I'm not going to get into it now, but I will later.
At 2 p.m. tomorrow. So when I put out the tweet at 2 p.m. tomorrow, I had so many of like my friends call me. I had former Chief Justice. Like, you really don't need to be fighting wars. You've just come from a good university. You have a great degree. You have a great future behind you. If you get into this war, it could be a problem for you. And I was telling them, imagine if in 1980s, you guys had also sat back and said, hands off this thing. I can live a comfortable life, so I'll let it go. So the point was to say, one, activists like Agatha deserve a community that believes in them. And that community can and should show up for them in the ways in which they should be shown up for. And I felt my duty in the immediate was to show up for Agatha and say, I can read that what James is doing is ridicule. This is not matter of fact, because the immediate premise on which James's argument was best, which is that Agatha had gone for a photo opportunity so that she could fundraise money, that's a false premise in the argument. So there was no point in debating it.
May I just ask him a question?
Go ahead.
Can't both things be true? Isn't it possible for someone ostensibly to believe in a cause and to be advocating it, while at the same time wanting to, kind of like if I were an environmentalist, let's say, I may want to see trees be planted. At the same time, I would want my benefactors to see that I'm doing the work of trees being planted. So I come from the school of thought that looks at it and ends up leaning more on the cynical side of things, mostly because this is Uganda. This is a nation of hustlers. We all have hustled. We do things like this. We like to show our clients that we're doing a great job. And so it sort of falls into that same frame. And then I would have to ask you this, Raymond. Surely, the issue isn't that we disagree in principle about the wrongs that might be committed, the violations of the Constitution. I think you'll find very little disagreement from me as to whether or not this administration frequently violates people's rights, whether it's trying civilians in a court-martial, whether it's denying people the right to protest. I'm with you on that 100%. But surely, if knowing that you then announce that you plan to hold a protest, you can only be doing that with the full knowledge that you're going to be intercepted. And so to then have, in a very timely way, a photographer standing by, ready to capture a fantastic, valiant video of you fighting for Uganda, the cynic in me just says, wow, congratulations, that's a good clip, it's gonna make the rounds. And it really just fits into that frame that a lot of us have here in Uganda, that this is how a lot of these actors operate. Are you telling me, Raymond, that Agatha could not have known that she would have been arrested that day?
I think your cynicism might be incurable, but I feel like...
But justified.
No, it might be incurable. I don't even think it's justified. I wouldn't get into whether it's justified or not. But I feel, and possibly you should perhaps read it that way, that there is an intersection between the things that Agatha is doing and the freedoms that you enjoy. And that intersection should allow for you to see the amount of human dignity that you should accord her. So there must be a guy, I'm sure, who comes into MCI and cleans his carpet. There must be a guy who comes into MCI and does the accounts. There must be someone who comes to MCI to be the CEO. Each of those people exert their agency to make MCI what it is. Whether some of them come in here and part of their cleaning is that they get money from it, it's at the end of the day, when you find a clean MCI, someone has exerted their agency towards it. Now, the things that activists fight for are for people to have a dignified existence. And that dignified existence is why do you have this hierarchical element? For example, in your case, you say someone's taking pictures so that a protagonist can see that they're working. Why do you not see the fact that someone is out on the street? The things they believe in,
Because
that themselves is ability to work. Why do you not see, for example, when you started RX Radio, you definitely knew that there are people who wanted to listen to some of the ideas that you had, and that they would tune in one day using their data to be able to listen to the things that you do. I do not think that you do it because they should tune in.
And yeah, but you see, I'm open and honest about my motives. Mine is a business, so I'm not hiding, I'm not acting in out of any form of valor or it's heroism. I'm running a business, right? Whereas for activists, it's a different compass by which they're being engaged. Essentially, they're coming from a position of morality and justice. They are saying we are doing something just, and which is why you are beseeching me to accord Agatha and others in that realm the respect that you feel they deserve. I do have one concern, though, that I wonder if it worries you that this is the same kind of argument that we normally hear from those who have been in power for the longest time. You know, we went in. They keep rubbing it in our faces. You are living under dictatorship, but we went in with 27 guys only. We sacrificed our lives. Our friends got killed. We were in the bush. We saved you. Be grateful. In fact, January 26th henceforth will be declared a public holiday so that our sacrifice can be venerated. And they use this as a justification for why they should be accorded more respect, that they should be accorded perhaps prolonged power. Do you not worry that approaching this whole thing of, hey, I'm fighting for you, you're lending credence for others who may believe they're doing things in the service of the public, and then they may use that to either require some sort of, to not be criticized, or should they violate you, you should just take it because after all, they are your saviors. Amin did the same thing when he took over Obote. I'm doing it for you. When he chased away the Indians, I'm doing it for you. Obote used to say very nasty things about Museveni and so forth. And whoever shall replace Museveni, let's say through violent means, if that's what to happen, we hope it doesn't. But if it does, that person too will be telling us they have saved us. If everyone is running around with a savior complex, then aren't we in trouble?
Are you familiar? Sorry, let me just respond to this immediately. Are you familiar with false moral equivalence?
I am.
Yes. Idi Amin, Obote, Museveni, all the people you've mentioned are people with power. What power does Agatha have?
But I'm saying
what public office does she hold?
Before Museveni came to power.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was before he came to power.
Yeah. So
when he came to power, he assumed a power position. That power position has things written in the constitution for it. So who James Onen is to me right now, tomorrow when you are a Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs, there are things I expect of you as Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs. There are things I expect of you as James Onen. Those are two different things. So there is no power that, Agatha is exercising over you. Your ability to call her hero or not means nothing in the grand scheme of things. It means nothing. I can choose to call her a hero. You're welcome to not call her a hero. I mean, there are people who felt Rosa Parks, that's not a hero. She sat on a bus, that's not a hero. There are people who felt Malcolm X, no, that's not my hero. There are people who feel, these people are not my heroes. They are perfectly entitled to their opinions.
Sure, so what
they're really perfectly entitled to their opinions. What I'm trying to show you is that if you come after powerless people with the same false moral equivalence as people who have actual positions of power, which positions of power are written into a constitutive document that rules over 45 million people, then you're making a fantastic wrong, a huge fantastic wrong, because tomorrow, if Agatha were appointed as a chief judge of this country, the things I would expect of Agatha are very different from the things I'd expect of her outside of that role.
I think that the challenge with that would be, and why I wouldn't be on board with you describing it as a moral equivalence, is that I feel like I'm arguing from principle. And principle means you have a foundational principle or set of principles from which you extrapolate and universalize. Meaning the standards by which I should judge a powerless person are not that different from the standards by which I should judge someone with power. Yes, with more power you can do more great things and might require greater scrutiny, but it doesn't mean that you are deprived of the same moral accountability just because you're powerless. So if a politician steals $5 billion, that is bad. But if a thief steals 5,000 shillings, that is also bad. I can't say that's a false moral equivalence because this one is unemployed and jobless and hungry, whereas the minister is stealing from theft. Is
the
theft.
principle is not the individual.
So
the principle is the theft.
No, my point is...
The principle is the theft.
The issue
Agatha
is
an activist.
In other words, the issue is to what extent do we hold people accountable for their actions? You seem to want to draw a distinction between those with power and those without. And I'm saying that it is the same. All that changes is an extrapolation. Once you assume a position of responsibility, then yes, you could say the stakes are higher, you deserve more scrutiny, perhaps you deserve more checks. It doesn't make you any less morally culpable if you don't have the same degree of power. That's the point that I'm saying. If your neighbor who is jobless robs you, he is just as bad as a minister who fleeces 5 billion shillings.
All right. If I
you
may.
Disagree?
Yes.
All right.
Let's let Fiona take.
As we on that specific point of just moral accountability, right? So just so we can have like a light on where your mind is at as well. When you talk about the performative aspect, the performative aspect that you can see in activism, are you seeing it like to the complete exception of the the advocacy, like some of the genuine advocacy that's in there? Are you seeing it like, is it like one track? This activism is doing this and this and this, therefore all the, to be fair, there are good things, Like, are you seeing it just like to the exception completely? I want to understand that part.
Okay, so I think generally, and this is something that's been said about the aid industry, or generally speaking, and I don't know if some might say it's unfair for me to characterize activism in the same vein. Essentially, I'm talking about an industry where people are trying to do some public good, whether it's alleviating hunger, educating girls, or fighting for democracy. All these efforts people are doing in order to improve society, for which sometimes they get paid. I will tend to put it together in one basket. Now, if you look at people's attitudes towards that over the years, there have been a lot of books written about this subject. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That's a very famous book that underscores how essentially these aid programs are used for geopolitical dominance, is used to fatten the pockets of a class of bureaucrats and technocrats who will do nothing to change the circumstances, lived circumstances of those they are claiming to serve. Yeah, they're going to drive around in expensive four-wheel drives, send their kids to the most expensive international schools, get all the perks. The best paying jobs are the aid jobs. Oh, I got a job. If your friend tells you I got a job in the UN, you're congratulating that person. Like, girl, you made it. Isn't that ironic that the help industry tends to be the best paying? And these are the kinds of incentives that I think corrupt the whole process, to where in the long run, people aren't much served by all these people that are claiming to want to help, whether it's in education or food security or environment, or even governance or accountability. And I find that a lot of the people operating the political activism space are equally essentially culpable in this area. Now, I want to make a distinction, and you are right. It's not all bad. There are activists doing good things. I'm just saying that quite often the most visible forms of it that we see is performative, and there's a reason it's very visible. There are people doing things behind the scenes. For example, when the first anti-homosexuality bill was passed in 2009, or 2010 it was, you had a group of lawyers who got together, Mwenda, Odoi, and so on and so forth, and they got their team together, their resources together, and they were just, they filed their petition to challenge it quietly. And then we woke up one morning and heard, judgment, the law has been repealed because of various violations. See, versus the activist who's making noise all the time. Oh, woe is me, I'm suffering, what, we're doing this. A lot of the gay activists who were quite outspoken at the time have since disappeared. Why? They have fallen out with members of their own community who feel disappointed that they were used to extract money from benefactors overseas. So you want to put yourself out there as an LGBT gay activist, what? Meanwhile, you're enjoying all of the perks and the spoils that come with it, doing nothing to change the situation of the people, doing nothing to get the law repealed. The people who actually got the law repealed weren't rah-rah activists. These were just people who just said, all right, here's a problem, let's go challenge it. They challenged it. Right now, Semakade is doing something similar in attempting to secure the release of the lawyer, Aaron, right? And right now he's catching a lot of heat because the other faction of the performative activists, they want his head chopped off. Allegedly, he went and spoke to Aaron in jail and told him to apologize to Muhoozi or something. Now, I responded to that argument in this way. I said, let's assume that's true. Supposing Semakade went and spoke to the other side and those are the conditions they gave him. And then he came and presented these to Aaron. And if it is true that that's what was said, and that would in some way help secure his release, obviously Aaron would have the choice of taking it up or not. It would seem like he has decided not to. But then to criticize Semakade, if it is true that he had those conversations, seems to me to run counter to the overall goal of trying to get this guy released. Because you can virtue signal about how much of a Puritan you are, and he's just going to continue to serve his 9 months in prison, right? And what problem will you have solved? All that you would have accomplished is that the virtue signalers get to feel like superstars. This guy rots in jail. There's so many activists who have rotted in jail. A lot of the members, many of the people that were arrested with Bobby Wine, I think during the Kalangala incident, who recently came up through some dialogue. I think Balam was in some way, the minister was involved in it. A lot of the way things move in this country require those sorts of backroom conversations, rightly or wrongly. And I take the view that if there's opportunity for those conversations, have those conversations. But those conversations aren't going to be the kind you see making headlines or all over trending on social media. The things you see trending on social media are the ineffectual rantings and ravings of people who seem to want attention more than anything else.
Interesting, because as you were speaking, I was just thinking, even from what Raymond said, because our perceptions coming from a time when there was no social media, and now being in this time where social media has provided the opportunity for many people to even become voices for one cause or the other, do you feel that social media also is affecting this perception? Because, all of this performance is primarily happening on social media. So do you feel that social media has had a hand in it, and how so?
I think so.
You think so?
So, James Onen right now is performing masculinity, as am I. You're performing femininity in some form or way. We have spoken over her head for almost 30 minutes, which is a perfect example of how men are. Not toxic, but it's a perfect advocate for it. I don't think in the latitude of things that you're speaking about, I don't think that we should secure the release of people from prison based off of whether the CDF feels they like the apology or not. I feel that's something Idi Amin would have done. That's something we fought against, something that our parents died trying to bring to life. That the freedom of a man cannot be determined whether another man feels like they accept the apology or not. I agree.
You are very right.
Which is what Semakade is leading you down to.
I'm just saying
that you are a Uganda low society president. Low society president. If it had come from Raymond, yes, Raymond is a non-actor. You have no power. The Uganda law society is written into the constitution of Uganda. You are supposed to advise the government of Uganda on the law. You're supposed to guide them on the law. And if by holding that position, you use that position to say, the quickest way to get the release out of this guy is to actually, let's just go and apologize. And then that means you're determining the behavior of government moving forward. Tomorrow when they take James Onen, I'll be like, bruh, the CDF has said you should kneel down, record a small video. It becomes indeterminate. The reason...
You're not wrong.
No. James, listen. The reason that the law became what it is today was create certainty among societies. Had a whole conquistador movement, I don't know how familiar you are with that, where people would set out on ships and say, I am setting out on a ship to conquer this area and bring gold for the leader here. And they would set out on a ship, go and get the gold and bring it back, and then it would be, what's the value of the gold that this guy has brought back? Maybe we can wait as 300 coins, maybe it can be like 300, maybe 200 coins, and then the reason that the law was written the way it's written is that we get certainty from it. I know how to behave as a person in society. I know right now, if I woke up and I slapped you, there are remedies that are available for you in the law. It doesn't have to be, what does the CDF actually think about Raymond slapping Onen?
Yeah, but what I mean is,
so I'm just bastardizing that argument to show you just how the lack of premise in your argument is.
But what I want to tell you is that you are not wrong, actually. I agree with you that there are things that are written into law, and ideally, that's how a functional society needs to operate. You are 100% right, and we need to aspire for that. But things not being as perfect as we'd like, okay, what do we do? So if we had to follow strict procedure, let's say, and let's just use this as an example, the Aaron case, okay? I don't know the details of it. My understanding is they hold him in contempt and he's been sentenced to 9 months. I'm not sure what the appeals processes are or whatnot. But assuming that the formal remedy for that injustice is a protracted legal process, which might more or less see him serving his full term by the time it is resolved, if there is an avenue through which that situation can be sidetracked, I don't see why it would be wrong to explore it. Even though you would be right in saying, in principle, we need to go by the book. But at the end of the day, he might just end up serving those 9 months anyway. And we can continue screaming about how wrong it is, but he will spend those 9 months there. But if an opportunity comes up and someone picks up the phone and says, by the way, if he says sorry to me, you know what, maybe I'll just chill the guy. That sucks, it's terrible, but it's the kind of country you live in. So if you were... did you say you were a lawyer?
Yes.
Okay, so if you were a lawyer and someone came to your client with that offer, are you telling me you would tell your client, no, reject this, we have to stick by the principles of the law? I don't care
James,
if the general is making you any offers or
you
overtures.
set off on this massive tirade with a fantastic argument, that if your neighbor steals from you, the principle is that that person has stolen from you. It was such a fantastic argument. It was such a great premise from which we could have a conversation. Now you're telling me, if Raymond steals from you, but because when he stole from you, he wanted 10,000 to buy a coffee, I can understand Raymond has a coffee addiction. It's fine, just let it go. This is where you're getting now.
No,
so the law is indeterminate unless James Onen wishes it. Where
I'm getting at is this. I agree with you that ideally we should follow the law to the T. But I'm saying, if you were Aaron's lawyer, okay, and you were faced with the prospect of, because if you're a lawyer, what you do is, sometimes you win cases outright, sometimes you lose outright. A lot of times you find a middle ground with the party that you're disputing with, and it's a win-lose situation. That being the case, if your client was presented with such an opportunity, are you telling me you would, as legal counsel, you would tell your client to refuse it?
James, you still don't get it.
Let me place like a tiny pin in that because...
let him answer that first.
Okay, go ahead.
Let him answer that because if he says
we're now speaking over our moderator because we don't get it. You're abusing your power now as a person seated on a panel. You're abusing your power. The moderator has the power. See, we can't wish her away.
All right, let me put a tiny pin in that. He's going to get back to you. But just that you brought up just the issue of how... Let me try and put it in a way that that will sound like what it is in my mind. So we're talking about, if you were the lawyer, wouldn't you take that option? But then it gets me thinking, what kind of precedent are we setting? Like if we just thought about that, what precedent are we setting if, for the sake of this hypothetical that we are discussing, what precedent are we setting if the head of the law society is making is taking that kind of angle to do this kind of thing? Is that a precedent we want to set? Because again, people with power, I want to understand how you guys are seeing that, because that's what I'm receiving from you.
That's a very good question, and perhaps I should have started by giving you a foundation of what my general beliefs are about the society we live in. Okay. I don't believe that we live in a democracy. I believe that what we have is a sham. By and large, it's a dictatorship, sometimes more benevolent, sometimes more malevolent, depending on where the tide is. A lot of these structures we have are for show, are for formality, and for the most part, whatever the big guy wants to go down is what goes down. Mm-hmm. And can I just say that this is not limited to just here. It's how the whole world operates. Mm-hmm. I mean, we hold the United States to be the greatest bastion of freedom and human rights. Have you ever heard of Julian Assange? He's a journalist. The world's most powerful democracy in the world is persecuting this man. So many other journalists have been oppressed and persecuted. under the United States. There's a genocide happening right now in Gaza. And one of our activist friends went and received the Human Rights Award from a person called the Butcher of Gaza, Anthony Blinken, the outgoing US Secretary of State, okay? I mean, they have facilitated Israel's decimation of the Palestinian people, and yet when the ICC tries to hold Netanyahu to account, what does the US government say? Exactly. So we can all posture about truth and justice and standards we should abide by. No one with power abides by them. They choose as and when to subscribe to such ideas, and when it's inconvenient, they won't. It's true there, it's true in Europe, and it's true in Uganda. So you can say, oh, we have a law society, this, the rule of law, that. For me, it's all just a circus. It's just a joke. It's like a pantomime, a little song and dance we do so that we the elites can feel good that, oh, you see, we have a modern civilized society. Truth is, we don't. So that being the case, if I'm this guy's lawyer, okay, and I will sit there and say, yeah, it was wrong, they grabbed him on contempt. But unless we cut a deal, it's going to be 9 months. So let me bring him the deal that has been suggested to me. If he wants it, he can take it. If he doesn't, then we can go the long route, and that will in the end result in him spending the full 9 months in jail anyway. That's what I'm trying to say. I see myself as a realist. I see people like you as idealists, and I don't know that is particularly helpful.
I don't know. James, I don't think you should throw around words like realist easily. I really don't.
I'm telling you. It's how the world works.
The realm of realism is actually the one that created the law in international relations. Realism is seeing the world for what it is, with all its imperfections. It's an age-old philosophical debate. Is mankind inherently evil? Is mankind inherently good? It's a long philosophical debate.
So how come we can't hold Israel accountable?
I don't see why you say, for example, you don't believe in our society. So why are you holding Uganda shillings? Believe that the Ugandan society exists.
That's not what I mean.
Why are we engaged in a debate?
About the political
yes,
structure.
why are we engaged in a debate?
See, there's going to be elections in 2020 next year. Yeah, all of us sitting here knows exactly how those elections are going to turn out.
In fact, we don't.
I think we do.
James Onen, in fact, we don't.
I think we do.
In fact, we don't. Because you see, in 1966, people thought, you know what, we know what it means to have power in Uganda, and we know who has power. And it didn't turn out that way. It really didn't turn out that way. We ended up in a military dictatorship. This is why I'm telling you, do not ignore the sacrifices that people are making. If someone is fighting against the abuse of power, then they are standing up against power to say, if you abuse your power, I'm going to hold you to account based off of what that power says you should do. And to fight back against the abuse of power means, look here, you're the chairman general of the court martial. You're holding a civilian inside the court martial. First of all, you are kind enough to say you didn't even want to read the details. I'm surprised that you have the latitude to read everything else but not read the details of Aaron Kiza's matter.
I essentially concluded or assumed that it must just be the usual
shenanigans. So why would you engage in a long debate on assumptions?
I was engaging in how people were reacting to the...
Yes, but that's the thing. You're engaging in a debate based on an assumption. So you are not inclined enough, first of all, to engage in the debate.
I'm with you. I'm willing to grant that it was unjust to hold him in contempt, that it is also unjust for his client to be tried in military court. I'm on the same page with you.
You aren't, in fact, on the same page with me, because if you are on the same page with me, then things you're saying, like, for example, Semakade can just go talk to the CDF and get this man out.
Yeah, we're only different in how best we think we should deal with it.
James, I have told you, I was standing surety for Agatha Traore. I have been editing in this town for over a decade. Do you think I do not have the phone numbers of every living being that's important in this country? You think I don't have the CDF's number?
In Uganda, they say there's 2 degrees of separation between you and the president.
Yes, but do you think I don't have the CDF's number, First Lady's number, Chief Justice's number? In fact, I believe I'm the last journalist that held a one-to-one exclusive interview with the CJ. You think I couldn't pick up the call and tell him, by the way, you really need to get down on this? But the point is, the advocacy in it is to send a message to the other people that this is wrong. This is abuse of power. And this abuse of power has consequences. It's the same thing I've been trying to tell you, that We're seated here. We're panelists. We've got a moderator. We can't talk over her. So I have to keep reminding you, do not talk over her. Not because she can't speak for herself. I'm perfectly sure that Fiona can speak for herself. But it's to show you and to advocate for other people who might watch this that if you have a moderator, you don't speak over them, so that you learn the lesson. And this is what the activists are really trying to show you with their advocacy. The advocacy element of activism is to show you that there is a problem here. This is not a normal situation. And the reason we are in this place right now is because so many things have been flouted. So many things that were determined have been flouted. Now, you find yourself in a scenario where it becomes acceptable. CDF, how do you feel today about Aaron Kiza? You know, but that man is a good man, you know? You should let him go, eh? It's unacceptable. I've got the CDF's number right here. I could call him. I can tell you for a fact. I could call him to secure the release of Aaron Kiza. But I won't do that because
the thing is, though,
the point of being the CDF of the army is that you are in charge of the territorial integrity of Uganda, not the freedom.
Don't you worry that you're a bit too much of a textbook dude? And I mean that respectfully. What I'm trying to say is that the world is a messy place. If you look at any geopolitical conflict today, whether it's Russia versus Ukraine, Israel versus Iran and Syria and all its, Hamas and all these, you're in a situation where both sides are feeling greatly aggrieved by the actions of their adversaries. Telling Israelis you have to compromise with Hamas, this is something many of them will not accept. If you tell Hamas you have to try and compromise with Israel, that is something they too will not accept. Each will have a long rap sheet of all the wrongs that were done to them. And they will argue that in principle, how do you expect me to forgive all these injustices that were committed against me? But at the same time, if you want to be a realist, and that's why I like Trump, you have to sort of sit both parties down and say, okay, it's a bad situation. How do we make the best out of a bad situation? And so even though I will agree with you in principle that, yeah, we should aspire to follow things by the book, the world is messy.
James,
so what are you going to do?
James,
if an opportunity exists for you to fix a problem, to expedite the fixing of a problem, why wouldn't you take that opportunity?
James, I'm asking you one question. How does Trump know that it's a bad situation?
We all know it's a bad situation.
How do you know that's a bad situation?
What do you mean? Like, we've seen the pictures.
Yes, you've seen them, but how do you know that the killing of another human being is a bad thing?
I mean, it's morally wrong.
Morally wrong, but how?
As in, people die.
Morals are different. Morals is what's good and bad.
It's a universal,
ethics is how you conduct them.
So we all operate under a basic universal moral foundation in which things such as murder, at the very least, most people agree is wrong.
You do not have that universal. You do not have that universality.
How do you resolve
Mr.
the
James
conflict?
Onen,
That's the point
Mr.
I'm
James
trying to
Onen,
make.
I am trying to show you that the textbooks that you are putting to the side are the reason that you know what's good and what's bad.
What I'm saying, this is what I said. I said you're too much of a textbook.
Yes, but
I didn't say textbooks are wrong. What I'm trying to say is, yes, have the textbook there. Read what it says, but also look at the reality of the situation and say, but you know what? Okay, Israel blew up half of Gaza. That was really messed up. But you know what? If I don't give them some leeway, they're never going to come to the table and the conflict will keep going on. So maybe let me try and convince the Hamas guys to let this slide, that slide, the other thing slide, so that we can have a chance at peace. Isn't that the kind of pragmatism you need to deal with a complicated conflict in a complicated world?
Why do you crave peace, Mr. James Onen?
Huh?
Why do you crave peace?
We all crave peace. We
like the idea of peace. No, we do not all crave peace. I would fantastically tell you for a fact. You know that the initial.
The moderator is talking.
No. Okay. We were getting somewhere with this. We were really getting somewhere with this. Because I'm challenging your best assumptions.
Please.
It was perfectly okay for the Romans, for example. The triumvirate would decide, we're going to conquer Egypt, we're going to kill them, we're going to enslave them. It was perfectly okay. World War I, it's perfectly okay to kill 2 million people in a day.
Okay, so put yourself...
World War II, no, I am making a point here, James.
Yes.
World War II, it's perfectly okay. It was perfect. You, James Onen, in World War II, would be trafficked to fight for one side, and they would kill you, and there would be no such thing, not even an inkling in the world that you deserve justice. Because there's nothing. There's nothing in the letter of the law that said James deserves justice.
Uh-huh.
Since the foundation of the United Nations, which gave us the Declaration of Human Rights, which you wish away. We now know which rights a human being is entitled to because people signed up on this thing they call.
I think before that declaration, there was
people signed up the Rome Statute and decided amongst themselves that, look here, you will not territorially invade another person.
Were not born in 1948.
No, we were not born in 1948, but this is, James, you ignore
human history.
Yes, but you ignore a lot of history that has led us to where we are. Human beings exerting themselves with their agency to create a world.
How do you resolve a geopolitical conflict where you have two warring factions who don't want to compromise? Do you not have to get them to at least agree to forgive each other of certain wrongs? How do you move forward? See, can you really afford to be a Puritan when it comes to what should or should not be done, where you have two uncompromising factions? One side has to give, ideally both, so that there's a win-win, to the extent that you can obtain one.
So what do you ask of power in Uganda to give away? Because I've heard what you ask of activists who are powerless. What do you ask of power in Uganda to give away?
Back to my point, we live in a world where it's a charade. The people with power are going to do whatever they want. So I'm not going to spend too much energy arguing with them about how to rule over me. They're going to do what they're going to do, and there's ways that we can, put pressure on them. There's ways in which we can express our displeasure towards them. We can continue to do that.
What are those ways?
To a limit.
What are those ways to express displeasure?
I mean? You don't think there's people in China who don't think that their government is overly oppressive? Today, Lee Kuan Yew is celebrated as the hero of Singapore, yet by all metrics, he's a dictator. I feel like these things are relative. So in the end, you sort of have to pick your battles. If you want to get into sustained fights with your leaders about what they allow you to do and what they not allow you to do, you saw in the era of COVID, all of the Western world, they had lockdown. People's rights were violated. People could not go to church. Schools were closed, which today people look back and say these were flagrant violations of human rights. The authorities used the basis of protecting health to impose those violations.
James, rights. So
no matter which world or which country you look at, your rights will be violated. The question is to what extent, and to what extent are you willing to accommodate?
What I'm telling you, my rights as a human being, as Raymond, as a Ugandan, are not given to me by any leader. They are not handed down to me on a silver platter.
That's what I'm saying.
A government does not hand out rights.
Okay, the U.S. Declaration
it exists to protect
of Independence
and promote those rights.
Our rights are given to us by our Creator or by God, or
not even by God. Inherent. I am born with them.
Which ideology? Some societies they say it's from God. Others say it's just inherent and innate. But the question is, governments all over the world can flaunt it at any time they want, and there's very little you can do about it.
How do you know a government is quote-unquote flaunting?
Julian Assange. Should he be in prison?
How do you know that Julian Assange's rights were flaunted?
Because he's a journalist, and if he's a journalist, he's allowed to report on stories, he's allowed to speak his truth, and not be persecuted or arrested for it. He's entitled to protections as a journalist.
So you're saying he was persecuted and arrested. How do you know that he was persecuted?
Well, based on the law, he's being persecuted. And we can all see that.
Why do you all of a sudden feel Agatha shouldn't walk to the Chief Justice's office? It's written in the letter of the law, literally, that there's a freedom of expression, there's a freedom of assembly that she can exercise.
Exactly.
But now, all of a sudden, Julian Assange, the law should apply. Agatha, I can lord over her.
See, the fundamental disagreement you and I have with activists isn't what they believe. It's really method and tactics. See, if Agatha were to point me to all the things she believes the government is doing wrong, I'll probably agree with 10 out of 10 of the things she's saying. We have no disagreement that people, according to our constitution, have certain basic fundamental rights. No disagreement from me. All we disagree with is what to do about it, what actions to take. That is it. And what might be motivating some of those actions. That is all. So if she wants to raise concern about certain things that are going wrong in the country, there's nothing wrong with that. But if she chooses to do so in a way that I think is counterproductive, I feel like I have the right to comment. I would certainly never say, I should never forbid her from doing it. She's free to do it. But if she does it and I feel that the approach isn't the best one, shouldn't I have the right to say that too?
So why do you feel that you should have a right to comment and people shouldn't have a right to express themselves?
Because it's two-way street.
Why is it that it's only you that must have right?
No.
Because this is the fundamental problem that we have.
It's a two-way street. So she can choose a course of action. Mm-hmm. I can choose a course of action. I can comment on her. She can comment on me. So it's mutually granted.
So in the spirit of actually having, like solutions, like if you disagree with this on the one part, what's like in a perfect sort of situation, how do you see this being handled that's different from what you disagree so strongly with?
So having had time to reflect, because I'm a good person.
Are you?
I've decided.
I couldn't tell that from the mile.
I've decided that I want to tone down a little bit and to not be as critical and as harsh. I want to give myself time to reflect on what people are saying and what people are doing and to hear different perspectives. It could be that I could change my mind, but as these are the views I currently hold, I will continue to espouse them. What I'm saying is I'll probably be less cheeky about it. I think I could have been more polite in how I conveyed my ideas. And if you want to accuse me of being intentionally provocative in how I was expressing it, you would be right in doing so. So that is my mea culpa. That is my concession.
What are
today.
you doing about people in positions of power that are abusing power?
So
your mea culpa is welcome, but what's that?
Myself and many other people in this country who also can see all of the things that are wrong in this country, we have taken the view, not all of us, but a good portion of us are kind of ambivalent to the situation. We don't think that whatever change an activist might enact will be substantial enough to warrant the investment of all this energy. We think even if you succeed in obtaining some power transition, we think the next guy will potentially be the same or even worse, as we have seen all across the continent. So we're not sort of holding our breaths about a necessarily much better tomorrow. A lot of us are kind of just trying to be, and to just live. So as a citizen, I do my part to provide opportunities for young people. If, for example, in terms of employment, I'll pay my taxes. I will try and be a good parent. I'm a parent now. I'll try and be a good friend and compatriot to my fellow citizens. I may not be on the front lines engaging the power structure directly. Those that wish to do so are free to do so, but I want people to understand that that's not what defines you as a better citizen. You are no better than the border guy who's driving kids to school every morning or the maid who's cleaning someone's house. We're all contributing in society in different ways. And I don't want activists to be seen as uniquely special because they have elected to participate in this back and forth with the state. And as it turns out, a lot of them are operating on fiduciary incentives. I learned fiduciary from you. Which means that we have every reason to question their motives, and thus they should not be self-righteous about why. Look, if you're obtaining really sweet grants to engage in activism and you want to rub it in my face that you're an activist and I'm not, hey, how about you give me some of that money? I'll be marching with you tomorrow or doing whatever it is that you do. My point is we all have a space. Activists can do activism. The rest of us can do what else we are doing, and that's all okay. But can activists please understand today that you're not special?
Nobody has come holding a banner to say, look, do you think that Agatha, when she walks into the supermarket, she gets a discounted price from the rest of us when she buys her things? Do you think that when she goes to get a service from government, they're like, oh, you guys make way, Agatha has come, finally, she must be the front of the line? Do you think that society operates that way?
And the rewards are different.
What we're operating with right now is your mental acuity, which is that you have put activists on a pedestal now. All of a sudden you feel that they shouldn't.
On a pedestal.
No, they haven't.
Yes, they do.
In fact,
you
they haven't.
yourself told me, what have you done?
Yes.
As if
I am asking you what you have done. That's not a pedestal. I'm just asking you, what are you doing?
In other words, and I think to quote you, did you read it? I think you called me bottle barrel of the scum. Did you use those words?
I didn't use those words. I said you're the bottom barrel scrap.
Okay, wow.
Yes, which
How's that not a superiority complex?
It's not a superiority complex. Not at all. It's because
so we are a bottom barrel
in the latitude
because we don't want to be activists.
No. James, I didn't say that because you didn't want to be an activist. I say that because you are ridiculing activists. There's a big mile of difference there.
So if we criticize the methods of an activist,
criticism is welcome. Criticism is welcome. I call up many of my friends in activism space and I say, I think that this thing you did doesn't work. I've written in as many places. I've written against business activists. I've written against political activists. Criticism is welcome. But ridicule, when you ridicule them, please be prepared, because for a long time, many people have sat back. I can't tell you the number of people who told me, don't engage, don't even go to the podcast. But because you and your ideas are not confronted, we don't make headway. Now your ideas are being confronted and you're seeing that there's a community of people who actually are capable of ridicule. So many people felt, look here, Raymond is actually incapable of ridicule. And I told them, no, I don't intend to actually engage with any part of James Onen's argument. And I called you after that to say, look here, the only reason I did this is not that I wanted to be mean to you. It's that to show you that by ridiculing you, you consistently try to make more sense, sober arguments. It's like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then I put out a blank page and I was like, yeah, we're getting somewhere now. We're really getting somewhere.
So this is a method thing.
So if I may ask you, so what, in your mind, what are the problems you're seeing with people like me, and what is it you wish to change?
Yeah, because, so this is the crisis that you have, that you feel you're not listened to in the activism space. And the activists are saying, look here, this space is as open as they come. You can walk in on any door stall, do whatever you want to do. This is not a power play. No one in the activism space has power to say James Onen shouldn't do what he's doing. Now, the only power that we have over you is, do we listen to you or not? Do we give you currency? Do we give your ideas currency? Now, increasingly by ridiculing you, you wanted to make the point that, you know, I need to be listened to. And that's the point Agatha is making to people in power, that this idea that you can jail a person who is a professional lawyer for 9 months is ridicule to the legal system. And she's basically saying, listen. And what they were doing in turn is what I was doing to you, which is to hold up a blank page and say, fantastic argument, but have you seen this blank page? It could turn into something different. So that's the point that I'm trying to make to you, that people in positions of power have due responsibilities we expect of them. We expect the Chief Justice to determine a petition before him whether civilians should be tried in the court-martial or not. Whether he wakes up in the morning and he's unhappy about it, whether he wakes up in the morning and he has views around whether civilians should go in the court-martial, that's his business. In the due office of the Chief Justice and sitting as a member of the Supreme Court bench, we expect you to show up and give us that judgment. That's what Agatha is saying. Show up and give us that judgment, because without that judgment, people like Aaron Kiza are in jail. Now, what your friends are doing is, you know, it's a dysfunctional society. Let's just make it more dysfunctional. Now, on top of, you can appeal this, but let's get the apology of the CDF. So where in the Constitution is the apology of the CDF as one of the appeal measures? Because then we will need to study the CDF every time they're appointing a CDF and say, how does this one like his apology?
Okay, so what I'm hearing in these last couple of minutes is that you have no problem, obviously, with criticism. It's important that systems are criticized and, you know, we make clear what's wrong. And James is also saying that here are my criticisms, and I also respect the fact that you were like, you know, I'm going to step back and rethink how I'm approaching certain things. So I think that ridicule has come out strongly as a problem of how the criticism is being expressed. It's being received poorly because how it's being expressed is, you know, it's more in the form of ridicule as opposed to, you know what, this is the thing, like give it to me in facts, give it to me in 1, 2, 3s. And I feel like somewhere there we're finding a middle ground. I feel like we are agreeing.
And
somewhat.
which is why I sort of proposed to him the idea that we meet and talk face to face, is that I think social media is not really best suited for discussing complicated
it's not nuanced,
ideas.
Right?
It tends to bring out the worst aspects of...
In fact, I love social media. So this is the thing. You are a communications expert. You've been in the space for a long time. And I'm a comms expert. I went through your thread, and I could see that you were choosing words carefully. You were putting words together to achieve an intention. And I was like, by reading the intention, I can see how to work around the intention. So social media is, it's a cesspit of everything.
It's fun and it has its uses.
No, it's a cesspit of everything. They are very intelligent people.
The point I just want to make is, you see, and as we've understood from this dialogue so far, is that we actually agree more than we disagree. What I'm saying is a lot of this tends to get lost in these back and forths that take place on social media. Because, you know, we've been throwing the word performative a lot, but social media is, you know, because in some ways you're playing to the crowd. People are
But
cheering
James,
you.
every
The other
day
side,
you're
they're
performing.
cheering.
Right now, you and I are performing intellectualism before these cameras.
Do you not think that
By dressing the way you're dressing, you're performing masculinity.
I understand, but do
by
you not-
having braces, you're performing beauty. By having glasses, you're performing visibility and sight.
Yes, but
so there's
hang on.
nothing wrong with performing. It's actually a great thing to perform. The
I'm
way
trying to say
society
that
has
having this
moved
conversation
is performative. Yes.
has some value. That it was a good idea for us to have this discussion. Do you not agree?
I agree.
Is there no
I
value
agree.
in what we have done
I-
that is different from what we were
James,
doing on
be
social
honest
media?
to these people. I picked up the phone and called you.
Yes, you did.
I picked up the phone and called you. I mean, anyone would have thought the way Raymond was sending those tweets to James, he'd never have called him. No, I picked up the phone and called you because
By
I
the way,
knew.
I didn't feel like there was any animosity. I understood as animals of social media, we were doing what we do, and that it was nothing personal.
No, for me it was important to show you, one, what ridicule is capable of achieving. Number two, to give people on social media that people like Agatha, to give them a sense of community, because many people do not know even the half mile of what they go through. But people in their community can understand what they're going through. And by showing them a sense of community, then they know that, one, that we think about them, number two, we see them, and number three, we're ready to fight for them. Now, many people with the latitude of ideas like yours will now be afraid to voice those ideas. And I am happy that they're afraid, because now they'll have to think twice. What does this ridicule mean in the grand scheme of things?
Think twice to criticize
No,
activists?
not think twice to criticize, but think twice about what is it that I'm adding to this debate. You have been praising Andrew Mwenda here, my gracious uncle, for whatever purpose it is. The ability of you and I to have this strong political conversation is the activism of Andrew Mwenda. He was detained and sent to jail, and he appealed against sedition. The reason the sedition charge was kicked away is because the judiciary sat and said, Mr. Andrew Mwenda simply wrote in the newspaper that Ugandan soldiers were stealing gold. And this is something which falls within fair comment, a journalist coming across evidence that they believe in that moment to be true. The advance of society since that ruling is immense. In fact, God rest his soul, Justice Mulenga, he is praised as the beacon of the freedom of expression in this country.
Yeah, but that's the kind of activism that I'm praising.
No.
Andrew Mwenda wasn't.
Andrew was in jail.
He was, but
In much the same way Aaron is in jail.
Listen, but he wasn't calling for people to go on the
No.
streets, was he?
You wouldn't
He wasn't
know.
trying to call attention
You
to
wouldn't know.
himself.
Do you know how many people marched on the streets for Andrew's sedition charge?
How many?
Do you know how many
remember that
justices
time.
acted out of activism to protect Andrew Mwenda? Do you know how many police and army officers had to have that conversation with themselves? That
About?
uncomfortable conversation about sedition charges? James, what I'm telling you is the society that you call Uganda, which you are cynical about, people have fought so much for it to get to where it is today. And many
The thing
people
is,
still make
I've been
incredible
clear.
sacrifices.
I've been clear, and the reason I highlighted Mwenda is because he's one of the people that takes up the challenge to legally address many of these violations. And he's been successful in some instances to get the Anti-Homosexuality Bill of 2009 repealed, plus the sedition thing.
But you pick and choose. Frank Mujisha was
No,
part of that petition. He's on the
fine,
streets
but-
as much as on...
Okay,
I
but
was
this-
on the streets for OTT, and I was a petitioner in the courts of law.
But I'm
And that
saying-
law is no longer with us today because
Okay.
of dual activism.
Right, so what we have now is a lot of people who engage in activism more for visibility and optics than actual results. And what I want to do is to praise the people and to highlight the people that are doing the sort of the groundwork. Now, in the current era, I look at what people like Isaac Semakade are doing. If you look at the back and forth he had with Agatha following the arrest of Counsel Aaron, you'll recall that members of the activism fraternity, the civil society fraternity, were unhappy with how Semakade was choosing to handle the problem. When he first came out with his statement, they felt it was not aggressive enough. They wanted him to make a more passionate stance against it, whereas his first statement indicated that they were going to look into the matter, do some consultations. And upon expressing dissatisfaction with the Law Society's approach, Agatha then calls for the protest, which ended up the way that it did. And so I look at how Isaac is doing things, and I look at how Agatha is doing things. I will say that in a free society, anyone is free to choose which approach they would prefer, but I look at the way Isaac's doing it, it looks more pragmatic to me, maybe not to others, to me it does. I look at how Agatha's approaching it, it looks more theatrical and more performative, and that's all I like to say. So if anyone wants to take up the mantle of challenging injustices,
James,
I want you to know that I am fully on board with that person.
Let me ask with the grace of a Mutoro man, how many statements has Agatha put out, and how many statements has Semakade put out? And who of the two would be called performative? Best of just how many statements they're putting out?
We're talking about actions, not statements. Actions.
So what are the actions that Isaac Semakade is taking? Because I remember I was alive in this country when someone was given bail by the court and they were rearrested by an entity called the Black Mamba. The Law Society president then called for a mass protest and said, we will not come back to the courts of law until this insane illegal act is done away with. Since then, there was some action. The man who
People are no longer being abducted.
The man who sent the Black Mamba towards the court of Uganda now is a little bit more apologetic because he found himself on the wrong end of that side of the law. So what I'm telling you is that years of work have gone into this thing called Uganda. You might be cynical about it. You're welcome to be.
I mean, whatever
But
gains you thought...
if you project that cynicism on people that are trying to do something good, for a long time, people have been quiet about that cynicism. Now, the time has come to engage it because we must deal away with the cynicism.
Actually, no.
The demographic structure... No, let me just finish. The demographic structure that we have now is in such a way that many of us were not alive when 1986 happened. Many of us were not alive when the 1995 Constitution was written. We found ourselves with a society that we've been dealt with. We're uncomfortable about aspects of the society. People are uncomfortable about gun-holding men and how they use their power and abuse it. And the kind of society that people would want to see is a society where civilian authority supersedes over military authority. That's a wish. I've told you there's a trauma document called the Constitution of Uganda. Read the first page.
So the reason
it's a massive trauma document.
So, okay, so at the end of the day, to those of us who you are calling cynical, and to be fair, it's by our own admission, essentially, I mean, just right now, what are we talking about? Besigye in court-martial, as an example. Abducted from where? Kenya. Kenya, our neighboring country, looks like it's the abduction center of East Africa at this point. What I'm saying is whatever gains you may think are attained by these sort of overt expressions of discontent, a lot of us just watch and just see the same thing happening. And so it feels like you guys in that community celebrate these minor wins, whereas some of us look at the wider picture and don't really see much in the way of a fundamental change. And so while you congratulate yourselves and pat yourselves on the back, we're seeing society fundamentally stay the same.
Mr. James Onen, do you think your grandfather had voting rights on Uganda?
Well, if
he
was born in during the colonial era, so obviously he didn't.
Do you have voting rights now?
I can vote if I want. But to what end? That's what I mean. Just because you have the power to vote, like what does it mean if the people you're going to be voting for are going to be beholden to other interests anyway?
So, no, do you see a change between your grandfather having no voting rights whether he wants to or not, and you having voting rights whether you want to or not? Do you not see the change there?
See, but at the end
is it so hard to see?
At the end of the day, what's the result? So, for example, in South Africa right now, having come out of apartheid, there's discussions about, okay, was it better then than it is now? So on paper, most people will agree, yeah, we can now vote. We now have black majority government, great. But based on every other metric of standard of living, blacks are now faring worse than they did, and there are surveys of a significant portion of blacks saying, actually, during the apartheid era, we had better access to medical care, we had better access to education, we had better security. Today, South Africa is the rape and murder capital of the world.
Mr. Jameson, and unfortunate for you, I am very familiar with South Africa.
Are you saying this is not true?
What you're saying is economic justice. A lot of black South Africans feel they do not have the same amount of wealth as white South Africans, which is a matter of fact.
So things are worse now?
But no, but there's been an advance now. More than 38% of the GDP of South Africa is held by black South Africans. Black South Africans. Today, South Africa is being competed for by black parties.
may be, but
whether it's the EFF,
all
whether
that has
it's the
happened is a new
ANC.
stratification of where now you have a new group of black elites.
No, but that's your
that are
cynicism.
reaping from the corruption.
That's your cynicism. But if your contention was that black people didn't have any rights, that contention is to bed now. Black people have rights. That's
my point
it's a whole new
see,
fight.
that's what I'm saying. I think you're being too academic about this. Like this is what I'm saying. You may have voting rights. You may have parity in various ways. But when it comes to the actual standard of living, your day-to-day life, we here in Uganda, we say the same. Fine. You could say before independence, we could not vote for a president that looked like us. All right. But there are many ways. We look at a lot of the infrastructure that stands in this country, a lot of which built during the colonial era, even including the parliament, where we hold our sessions to discuss matters of national interest and importance. Colonial legacy. Owen Falls Dam, still producing much of the power we're using today. Colonial legacy. There are many of the so-called respected schools built by colonialists. So we look at the past and we can appreciate that even though we didn't have voting rights, there are ways in which life was better. Today we may be happy that our representatives look like us, but what is the quality of our life? What is the standard of living that we enjoy? Hong Kong recently, for them, they got their independence from Britain around 1997. Until then, it was a British occupied territory. Okay. Well, we can all see that the people of Hong Kong see themselves as quite, very developed as compared to their neighbors on the mainland. So this idea that on paper I have rights, I can vote, therefore that in and of itself is a win, I think is an imposition that is highly academic in nature and doesn't really speak to people's life aspirations.
Mr. Onen, I
I'm
would
going
implore
to-
you not to vote into the international relations, because that's my spectre. That's what I studied to do.
I'm going to put a pin in the international part of it just for a second, because I'd like to tell you what I'm hearing from you. So what I'm hearing from Raymond is, this is where we've come from. And there are people who did things, who made moves to help us come to where we are now. And James is saying, yes, we've gotten to that place and there are still things that don't work. Like, just to make it as basic as possible, there are things that are still not working as well as they could. And I don't feel like that's a disagreement. Like, if we really get down to I don't feel like that's, yes, there's a lot of things you're disagreeing on, I get it. But just at the heart of things, yes, there are still things that don't work, and that's why we need activism in this space to bring us to even better things. Now, is it working ideally? I think, yeah, there's definitely some things wrong. I think we are agreeing that there are some things wrong. But I think that down, I feel like deep into what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that in there's an agreement on what, on where we've come from and where we're going.
I think we are correctly diagnosing the problem. We just disagree on the solutions.
True. I think that the method...
We're not even disagreeing on the solutions. We're just disagreeing on James lecturing other people on their method.
I think
that's the only thing.
That's
no one
okay, so am I allowed to opine on people's methods?
You're allowed to. You're allowed to. But what you should also expect is that if you're cynical about it, if you ridicule them, you should expect some level and latitude of ridicule and cynicism towards you. And
if
when
I can take it.
And when it comes to you, don't start to make fantastic arguments about things. No. You've chosen to ridicule. Go down the path of ridicule.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to, I think we are quite a bit.
Have we been going on for a while?
We're quite a bit up there in time, yeah? And we have a lot of comments. There's no possible way I'm going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to kind of pick and choose. Well, you guys are on Twitter, so I'm not going to say, please don't be offended. You're just, okay. I see Aaron says, James is just obsessed with Agatha. I don't even know where to go with that. Okay, according to Onen, Semakade is an activist and Agatha a performer. Accurate? Thoughts?
Not black and white, but it's more...
It's grey?
It's where
I would
the degree
implore,
to which either leans in the
I
other
would
direction.
implore anyone first to understand that Semakade holds an office called the President of the Uganda Law Society. That office has duties and responsibilities that are due to them. And he must perform those duties. He can't wake up and say, I don't feel great today, I'll not do this. No, there are duties there that he must perform. And as far as performing those duties goes, I would say I have been let down, massively let down by what I thought a functional law society president should be doing. So is he a performer? I don't know. Is he a great activist? I think that he's been a great activist. He's had so many cases in the courts of law that have gone his way. I think that he fought back against financial scams and did a great job then. But that I am able to discern that in his time as the Uganda Law Society president, that an advocate could be detained for 9 months by a general court martial under his reign, and all he's doing is sending an expedition, a fishing expedition.
What would you expect him to do?
He is the president of the Uganda Law Society.
Yeah.
One, he is always ready to summon an AGM. Why not call the AGM of the lawyers? Let them decide what they want to do about this.
Okay, so you are criticizing his methods.
Let him call an AGM. I'm not criticizing his methods. I am criticizing his lack of performance of duties that are assigned to him by his office.
He himself and others, and I agree with him, think the approach he's taking is more practical and more prudent. And you are entitled to believe that that is not the case.
Except, James, like I've been trying to make the case for almost 2 hours now, that if you hold an office, what you think and not think is really immaterial. The office has things that were requested of you, that are demanded of you. The president of Uganda can wake up today and say, I think that, James Onen should go to jail. Fantastic, it's a great thought. But should James Onen go to jail? Maybe not, because there's something that's called a law there.
No, but I mean, you can't expect him to do what everyone wants him to do.
The ULS Act. Somebody should hold up the roles and responsibilities of the ULS president. I am happy to frame them and send them Tsemakade as a gift, so that he can look at them every day and say, I have to do A, B, C, D.
It sounds to me like a very unfair standard. If, for example, our country was invaded by a foreign aggressor, right, our president would have a number of options to consider. Just because he chose an option that we disagreed with, it doesn't mean he's not doing his job. It would just mean he's not doing what we would prefer for him to do, right? So if you're unhappy with the approach he's taken and you think you can do it better, I would urge you to communicate those ways to him.
If our country was invaded by an aggressor and our UPDF said, you know what, today is a great day for us to have ice cream at Cafe Seri, it would be such a letdown, because their duty is to fight back against the aggressor. Yeah, as we find a solution, whichever way the solution comes.
Like I said,
that soldier owes us a duty to stand.
You have to be practical. If your aggressor is more powerful than you and can annihilate you, you have to sit down and have peace talks. You know what I mean? You have to think of the bigger picture and say, okay, you know what? If I aggress back, or if I do not surrender, or whatever it is, that this person has the likelihood of overrunning me. So might as well have a conversation with this guy. Tito Okello met with Museveni when they called for peace talks. In my mind, that was a good thing to do. Museveni himself has held peace talks with various rebel factions, with members some of whom have ended up being part of his government, like Moses Ali and others. Now, we look at that, and it would be fair to look at that as a strategically positive move. There could have been more hot-headed members of his administration who would have wanted like total annihilation of the enemy. But in the long run, I think we can agree that being more accommodative of those hostile forces ends up being better. And all I'm saying is, just because you may disagree with an approach that Tsemakade is taking doesn't mean it has failed. It just boils down to a difference of opinion in strategy, which I would encourage you to communicate. But I think it's unfair to declare him to have therefore been a failure just on that basis. Mr.
Museveni wasn't meeting Tito Okello so that he could negotiate with him how the latitude of abuse of power should be held.
But you see, Tito
he was meeting him over the interests that they both shared.
Yeah, but Tito Okello didn't really have an option
Isaac Tsemakade, the president of Uganda Law Society, please, we implore you, look into the ULS Act. What is it that act asks you to do when an advocate who belongs to the ULS, a paid-up subscribed member of ULS, when an advocate like that is detained by a general court-martial, one, he's a civilian. Why is he being tried by the general court-martial? Number two, he's a professional lawyer listed on the roll of advocates by Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye. He retained him as counsel. That's his professional job, to represent.
Help me understand this.
I'm going to reel us in. I'm going to reel us in. Because I know this is a conversation that can keep going. Is that one thing you're going to say literally going to take you 20 seconds?
20 seconds.
James can never say one thing. That's the problem.
I was just going to say.
That's both of you. That's both of you.
I've lost my train of thought. But I think I was going to say that... I've forgotten.
Okay, let me reel us in with just a couple of questions, which are short answer questions, to be clear, just to wind us up on this conversation. So first is, let me start with activism, because that's where this conversation started. It's about activism. I know, well, let me just ask you, just so you can say it again. Do you believe activism has a place in our society?
Yes. Advocacy and activism have the fantastic place in our society.
Okay.
They are the reason society is progressing, in fact.
All right, James, same question.
I think for the vast majority of our activists, for them it's a hustle, and I don't begrudge them that. Do activism, make money doing it, but there's going to be some of us who are going to see the performative nature of it.
Do you believe it has a place in our society?
Point it out. Not as much as they'd like to think, in my opinion. I think the real work is being done by the people that we never hear about, who are quietly...
So the quiet activists?
Yes, they are quietly doing their job, not calling attention to themselves, making the kinds of moves that lead to actual long-lasting change, not just a few highlight reels on social media that get people excited.
Okay, that now brings me to a different thing, because it sounds like now it's not about the activism, it's about the activism that is shining, like it's not the quiet activism.
Where that is the goal.
Okay, where
and
the goal
not the
is.
result. That is the goal. So, for example, as I sit here, I want Aaron out of jail. I think he should not be there. Is it wrong that they put him in there? Yes. Should he not be tried in a court-martial? Yes. Neither should his client. Yes. However, he is there. I want him out. If there's an opportunity for him to be gotten out of there, as if I were his lawyer, I would explore that on my client's behalf. Now, we don't yet know if it is... I mean, I think I read a report in The Observer where Aaron he admits that Semakade had that discussion with him. We've not yet heard Isaac's version of the story. We'll wait to see what he says. But I'll just go and assume that it is true.
Okay.
I'm saying if he did that, then that's fine and that's okay. And he should continue to find different ways of, solving our problems. Sometimes it may not require strict adherence to everything that's written in a book. Ideally, yes, but sometimes, man, you have to be a wheeler and dealer. I mean, we live in the real world.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that one. Raymond, so you've been clear, that you see how important activism is to not just our society, but, literally how we move, how we are growing. Do you have any criticisms?
I find a massive problem with this idea that activism is not the real world, that being out there on the streets and demanding change is not part of the real world. I've had the privilege of living in multiple jurisdictions where activism has been very fantastic. Kenya wouldn't have the constitution they have today if it wasn't for the activism of Raila Odinga. Uganda wouldn't be as open as it is today if retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye wasn't on those streets every day. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation in any way if there was no form of activism. My King Toro was very good at fighting empires. In any case, we were slaves to the Luos for close to 23 years. We had to fight through both activism and
pet names that sound
yes,
like they're
yes,
from our
we've
place.
had to fight. So all those years, activism is in fact the real world. It is, people are unsettled. The Chief Justice, I'm sure, is very unsettled. I have many accounts of his unsettling manner. He says, why are people marching to my office? Why do people feel like I'm not doing enough? He's just ranted about the fact that, bail should have been given to Segirinya. So you can see the discomfort. And that's the point of the advocacy, which is to discomfort people in positions of power so that they can wake up to the responsibilities they have whilst they hold on to power. Now, I don't make the false moral equivalence that activists have the same power as these people. No. Activists do not have a formal office, for example, that's assigned to them. There's no office there that says, this office is Activists of Uganda. We have fundamental rights that are granted to us. We have rights which are inherent for us. There are limitations to those rights, and I feel many times that Ugandan activists work within those limitations. Now, what is essentially being pushed back against, which is, can there be civilian authority over military authority? That is a conversation that Uganda has been having intermittently since the 1800s. And I feel like we've made fantastic progress. We've made fantastic progress because previously it was Kabalega would use his Abarusura army. He would go and attack the Kabakas, the Mwangas, and he'd take over large swaths of land. There was nothing there that would hold him back because he was using military power and saying, might is right. And when I have the power, then I can get my way. We came from there to now, both of them facing an external aggressor who actually had the same military power, who was the colonial government, which came here with the King's African Rifles, took over large swaths of our land, took over the organization of our society, and even took over our productive means. We've come from that to now where we live in a country that has a constitution to it, that has laws to it, that we try and abide by those laws. There might be a 12%, 20%, whatever number where we don't abide, but by and large, Ugandans abide by those laws. There's a reason why when you head out on the road, you know which side of the road to drive. And the reason you drive on that side of the road is because that's the law. The law says that. And you can't wish that away in the progress of society. I feel like society has to be determined and certain for us to make progress. There must be things that are certain. I must know, for example, if I go to represent my client in the General Court Martial, I am there to represent my client. And this is what the law says. And within this law, I will perhaps get a decision that I want. If someone is unfortunately unhappy about the way the Constitution is written, there's a constitutional court. You can go there and say, I'm unhappy about this constitutional court. Mm-hmm. In any case, I've often thought, if the army is unhappy that the Constitution doesn't give them power to try civilians, they can file a constitutional court petition before the justice and say, as the army were filing a constitutional court provision, can you interpret this Constitution so that civilians can come under the reign? Now, those processes, when they happen, they allow us to have fantastic debates about, is this the kind of society we want to live in? And every time we have those conversations, we make progress. We make progress. We really make progress. Many people underscore this, that you're Luo, I'm a Mutora, and I'm seated here with you in under 56 years. There are places where people have fought 400 years, the Romans and the Greeks. There are places where people fought 300 years just to be able to live side by side. We are making more fantastic progress than there was before. So I feel like this cynicism that people use to try and engulf the world that people try to create is unfounded. But it also serves the narrative of people in power because they keep throwing it at you. They keep throwing at you things like, you shouldn't go to the streets because we'll shoot you. But that's illegal. If you shoot someone's child, it's illegal. But it's legal for their child to go to the street. So you're using an illegality to stop a legality. And that's abuse of power. And that abuse of power has to consistently be held. Now, some people do that through investigative journalism. Some people do that through writing columns. Some people do that through cynicism. Some people do that through going onto the streets. I feel like everyone should be allowed to do what they want. And if everyone is allowed to do what they want, then you must anticipate, and this is what I've been having conversations with in the activist community, that oftentimes when activists come up against cynics and against critics, the world is conditioning them to keep quiet, take the high road, avoid this. But nobody ever got their freedoms on the high road. Nobody ever got their freedoms on the high road. Rosa Parks decided, I'll sit on this bus, The Walter Sisulus, they decided, I'll go and practice law. Whether you jail me or not is another matter. I will come here and practice that law. And those communities make fantastic progress because of that. There was a man in this country called Mr. Gracie Bingira. And this is, I would like to impress it upon you, Mr. James Onen. There are two people in this country who I love to write a huge column about. Mr. Gracie Bingira and Mr. Kale Kaihura. Both men had immense power. Mr. Gracie Bingira wrote something called, I think, a detention order, or protective order, something like that, which allowed the government to arrest and detain any person over long periods of time. Guess who fell victim to it? They arrested him, threw him into Karamoja. Mr. Kale Kaihura, when he was IGP, actively campaigned and said bail should be taken away for people. Like, if we arrest a suspect, they shouldn't be given bail. The day that Mr. Kale Kaihura was picked up and taken to the General Court Martial, He filed for a bail application. Why would you fail for an application in something you don't believe in? Now, Mr. Kale Kaihura has his freedom, but he knows that he owes his freedom to the fact that activists have fought for years to get to this point where, one, if you think that someone has committed a crime, your thoughts are irrelevant in the matter. Everyone is presumed innocent until they are proven guilty. And we try and determine whether you're guilty or not through a civilian court. The General Court Martial was established for the discipline of soldiers. If I'm not a soldier, as Aaron Kiza, what form of discipline are you going to give me? And that fight has taken people's lives. It's crippled people. There are people who have been crippled for all their lives simply because they fought for the idea that civilian authority should be above military authority. Now, the people who fight that military authority should be above civilian authority, they're perfectly entitled to their fight, but can they please do that without abusing the power that they have? That's all we're asking.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Raymond. I guess to go back to like just that item of criticism, I was wondering if you have any criticisms as to how activism is being practiced, quote unquote.
Unfortunately, I don't have any criticism.
Okay.
I feel like, look here, the thing with the freedom of expression is that it's a liberal thought. And liberalism thrives on globalization.
Let me rephrase the question for you. Are you going to say that you see no issue with the activism community, the NGO community, generally speaking, regarding the extent to which, wait a second, the extent to which a lot of them are inspired by careerism to a lot of times enrich themselves and have no real interest in helping the lives of those they purport to be representing? Are you saying that that somehow miraculously political activists are exempt from this kind of scrutiny, that this doesn't happen in that sector?
I mean,
the way it does in every other sector of humanitarian
Mr.
or advocacy
Onen,
work?
You went onto the Sanyu radio for over 10 years. You were earning money to become as fantastically wealthy as you are today. I'm not going to ask Sanyu FM why were they paying you. You are exerting yourself and your agency, and you deserve human dignity in the exertion of your agency.
Yeah. But
you found a place that could employ you. You had skills that you could apply. You exerted your agency to those
I think
two,
in the
and
same
produced
way,
an outcome.
What I'm saying is, I feel like I've been fair in at least expressing interest in understanding the concerns of the activism community. I wish the same courtesy could happen the other side, where you're willing to you are willing to consider the perspective of those of us who have doubts. Just a second. A lot of people, not just in Uganda but worldwide, even right now as we speak, Black Lives Matter has been going through a huge scandal. We know that they purportedly came into existence in defense of a good cause. However, the leadership has been under scrutiny and has been found to have misappropriated funds, bought mansions with the money that was donated, and so on and so forth. Today, you don't even hear about it. My point is, it's unfair to dismiss the criticism or even cynicism of people who look to the do-gooders, right? Who do this job of saving others for money. A lot of us have good reason to suspect that those who present themselves as fighting for us have their own personal motives for doing so. It would be unfair of you to completely discount that suspicion, given what we have all seen in the world
James,
today.
You have demonstrated a lack of understanding for what agency actually means in activism and in advocacy. There are many forms of activism. I've told you. The guys filming this cameramen, they are activists.
But you're not listening to what we're saying,
but
Raymond. It's like you're dismissing my point.
I am not dismissing your point. I'm just trying to show you.
This is a fairly widely held view.
Today, at the end of this day, the cameramen filming this will get paid. They have exerted themselves and their agency to what they are capable of doing. Now, they deserve dignity. And that dignity is the fact that they've come here, they've expended their skill, they have made for you a great film set. They filmed this for you for almost 3 hours. And as a result of them exerting themselves to that dignity, they deserve a fair payment. But wait, James, that is a very capitalist argument. And the framework of capitalism is nowhere near enough to understand social good and social activism. It's nowhere near enough to understand organizing.
I'm
when
really
people-
surprised that you
No.
seem unwilling to entertain.
I am not unwilling.
This
You do
very
not have
important concern.
No, James, you do not have the
We
framework
see people
for
working in
this.
World Bank, USAID, all these institutions, humanitarian institutions,
Because you do not
purporting to help us. Dambisa Moyo, Zambian economist, wrote this book called Dead Aid, where she's evaluating the billions of dollars that have been pledged towards the development of Africa ever since World War II, and how all of it has gone to waste, that people are poorer. Meanwhile, the expert class are all richer. We keep hearing about how America is helping Ukraine by donating billions of dollars in aid. Even Zelensky himself said those billions they keep announcing they're giving to Ukraine doesn't even really go to Ukraine. It goes to the military contractors who supply the arms that are then sent to Ukraine. So behind all these pledges of trying to help are very selfish motives, and a lot of people have become wise to this, and this is the danger, and this is the hubris. I mentioned the word hubris a few times in our Twitter exchanges. Hubris means you are blind to the reality that people are looking around at those trying to save us and are seeing that they have very significant financial motivations for doing what they're doing. For you to act as though that is inconsequential, I feel is highly disingenuous. At best, you would say, yes, James, there are people who do that. However, the people I know, the few that I've interacted with are different. For you to completely deny that this happens is a big shock to me.
Mr. James Onen, what I have said I deny is that you do not have the framework to understand social good and activism.
You're using big words, but are you aware that people
I do not think that I'm
abuse
using big
their
words.
positions?
I feel like for a man that just said hubris, you're really reaching now if you say that I'm using big words for
I
things
can't
like
believe
this.
you're blind to this.
I am not
Everyone
blind to
knows
this.
It's
I
called
am
grifting.
Okay,
Off of
Mr.
people's
James
poverty
Onen,
and misery.
Mr. James Onen, you have made a fantastic case. You've gone from Dambisa Moyo to wherever. Unfortunately for you, Dambisa Moyo was my lecturer too.
Isn't she amazing?
Give or take, yes. She
There
has
you
a
go.
fantastic, she has an argument for the fact that, look here,
Good.
foreign aid hasn't produced the outcomes that it was meant to produce.
Thank you.
But she doesn't argue that foreign aid was not given. She doesn't argue.
It was given.
She doesn't argue that the agency expressed within that foreign aid was never there.
That's
she doesn't
not the point.
argue
That's not
that
the point.
African
the point
leaders
is that the
did
aid
not.
hasn't
No,
led to
wait,
development,
James,
and
I
that it has
listened
served
to
to
you.
enrich those
I listened
who
to
purport
you.
to give
I
you.
listened to you. She doesn't argue that African leaders did not want to take the African countries out of poverty. She doesn't. That's an ideal that they were striving for. They exerted their agency and tried to use foreign aid to get it. She equally doesn't have the data for it, because the data for it now, you'll find that data with Steven Pinker, that yes, you can argue, till cows come home, till cows come home, that African countries have not become as economically successful as the Western economies, which the theory of catch-up. But that's a separate argument from that these African countries, in fact, were starting from scratch. Uganda's GDP in
Are you going to
1980...
say that
No,
money doesn't go
wait,
to-
James, wait. Uganda's GDP in 1986 was $4 billion. To date, not $4 billion. That is a massive stretch.
Just a minute.
So because the outcomes were not exactly like the Western outcomes doesn't mean that
Let me get
agency
you loud
wasn't
and clear.
supplied.
Are you trying to tell me that you don't believe that there's a cottage industry of technocrats and bureaucrats who are benefiting from all these billions of dollars that are being poured into third world countries in the name of aid and development? Are you claiming that you do not see this?
Okay, James, let me put this in a way you'll understand. You were on morning radio for Sanyu FM for more than 10
A
years.
business, a
Yes.
commercial
No, please.
A commercial entity.
So we're not
doing charity
Yes,
work.
we're not in contest that you were on Sanyu Radio for more than 10 years. Right? Sanyu Radio hoped to be Uganda's biggest radio. Is it Uganda's biggest radio today? Does that discount that you were not on Sanyu Radio?
It's a
Does
business.
that discount that you
It's
didn't?
a commercial radio.
But that's the thing. I'm using
with
your
an intention to make money.
I am using your
Is a
framework.
charity a business?
James, I'm using your framework to show you that you do not have the tools to assess social
At least
good.
acknowledge that
No.
yeah, there are guys living large
because the tools,
on aid and
because the
advocacy,
tools
I
you're
accept.
using
However,
are capitalist.
the guys I
Gentlemen.
like are different. At least say
Gentlemen,
that.
Can I at least make the case
Are you
that
gonna
I
make
was
it in
making? Yes,
just a
in
couple of
conflict,
seconds?
yes.
All right.
So look here. Is the world today more peaceful than it was before? Because James has made a fantastic example of dissing the United Nations for whatever he thinks. The world today is a more safer place than it was years ago. The number of people being killed in war has gone down. Does that mean that people are no longer being killed in war? No. But the number of people being killed in war has gone down. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it had taken years before we saw a country with territorial boundaries attack another country in expansionist motive. Before the UN was in existence, that was an almost everyday occurrence. People could expand themselves in any way that they thought. So the people who exerted themselves in the agency in creating the United Nations, you can see the outcomes of their agency. Are those the outcomes that the world demands of them today? No. I tell my father this all the damn time. You picked up a gun and went and fought in whatever you call it, a civil war. Fantastic, that was a sacrifice you made. That was your war. But right now, my war is I can't get onto the property ladder. I earn currently almost 4 times more than my father and mother combined earned during their time of working. And yet they were able to own all this fantastic property. They were able to good schools. Now, does that mean that my parents failed? No, it just means that the circumstances have changed. That now I am fighting an economic war. Previously, they were fighting a political war. Now, it's the same thing that activists are telling you, that the abuse of power that they are fighting now, that's a fantastic change in circumstances. The abuse of power that existed before was martial decree. People were being shot and killed by martial decree. We decided after that martial decree and after civil war that we should be ruled by a constitution. We made a fantastic constitution. And with that constitution came some roles, responsibilities, there came some power, and that power was assigned to people. Occasionally we tinker with the constitution, we amend it. And if you want extra power, if you want power to force activists off the street, go into a constitution amendment process. Why are you afraid of that? Let's have a political debate on should we have street protests or not. Let's have an active political live debate, but also allow for people to have their freedom of expression during that debate. Now, I am not cynical. I can't say, for example, that today Ugandans are not freer to express themselves as they were 20 years ago. No, I can't do that. There are all these fantastic radios. There are all these social medias which have changed the game of expression. There are people who, in their expression now, no longer even care about the political motive that created the freedom of expression. That's well within their right. If a TikToker is a model and all they want to do is model on TikTok, that's well within their right. I don't want to lord over them that, you know what, you must fight for political expression the way that I fight for it. And this is what I'm trying to show James Onen, that look here, your conceptual framework is very limited. If you want to move into the space of activism and actually be a good critic, adopt the conceptual framework within which activists operate. There are many criticisms there. This is not the platform for it. This is really not the platform for it. Because
I don't understand, because this, whatever you're calling a conceptual framework, because ours is a discussion of tactics, methods, and motives. Right?
It's unfortunate that you wouldn't see a conceptual framework there. Because, it's really unfortunate.
Because that sounds like an overcomplication. You're making it sound mysterious, more mysterious than it actually is. You're being superly academic about it unnecessarily. Because the mere fact that it's difficult to get you to concede that there can be abuses, that there can be selfish actors with selfish motives in this area, I'm stunned. At least admit, yes, there could be some bad actors, but the people I speak for are better. No, at least
James,
make that concession, because if you do, then I can at least appreciate that you're coming from a place
James,
of good
you're
faith.
asking me to do that because you want me to enable your narrative. And it's
I'm
unfortunate.
You.
No, you're not helping me.
I'm helping you.
You have no capacity to help me in my argument, James.
The reason I'm helping you is you came to be a part of this conversation because you are concerned that viewpoints like mine are spreading and you felt a need to confront it, correct? You said this. Now, my viewpoints aren't arising from a vacuum. That's what I'm trying to tell you. People are looking around and making observations about how all these actors operate and are leaning towards the side of cynicism anytime someone comes forward claiming to want to save them. That's why to be in denial of the fact that this is the reality people are perceiving doesn't help you, because it allows those bad actors and bad apples within your rank to continue in this behavior to further reinforce these negative stereotypes,
James,
so that by the time you want to come back and have another conversation, you have an even bigger problem to deal with.
James, there are platforms and conceptual frameworks to confront those people. Do not be worried. Why are you worried? you're cynical about the world. So why are you worried whether it turns out good or bad?
All right, hold on. Right there. I feel that this particular point that you have been discussing has been labored quite a bit. And I feel like whoever is listening has gotten what you're trying to say about this point right here. So what I'll take us into is like a quick parting shot, because this is clearly something that is, this is a continuing conversation. I do feel that having you in person as a consumer who was online also reading and listening, I do feel like some things have become a little bit more clearer. I do feel this conversation had more nuance than what we were consuming on social media, which is a good thing.
We're in a ridicule. Now we are in a conversation.
There we go. Exactly.
I would invite James for an actual debate, because there we would have actual counterfactual measures. Okay. I would check him on some of the things he's saying, but I can't do that.
Are you promising us one of those?
Part 2.
No, I told him, if you want a debate, the Uganda Debate Society is there. I'm perfectly okay with a debate. I will show up any day for it.
Okay.
I don't duck from debates.
All right. Well, that handkerchief has been thrown, and you will discuss it. But kindly share with me just parting shots. I'll start with you, James.
First of all, I want to express my gratitude to Raymond for reaching out and having that conversation. I found it to be extremely constructive, even though we don't sit on the same side on the issue. The fact that I was able to express myself, he was also able to, and for people to be able to engage with the issues at to some degree of depth, I thought was very good. And then when he reached out to me on Monday with a courtesy call, I was also very happy for that. And it really sort of emphasized the point that in a lot of this bickering we do online, it's really not anything personal. I have tremendous respect for him. And the fact that he agreed to have this conversation has allowed even more of an exploration of these ideas, and has also allowed some more nuance to be unpacked, because there's only so much nuance you can contain in a text message, even a long thread. A lot will be lost in translation and text. People interpret things their own way, but I think people have a better understanding of what he believes, and perhaps a better understanding of what I believe. And I guess from here we will go and engage further with the various people who will view this conversation and leave their comments. And to that end, as for the activists out there, if you feel as though we've been taking it out on you too much, it's not personal. Not always, anyway.
But, only sometimes.
But in a way, we're trying to be helpful. We do agree with all of the issues that you are raising. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for change. We just disagree on the methods and the strategy. And we also do speculate about your motives, which, if there are fiduciary motives, like Raymond said, someone is offering their work and time. They deserve the dignity of some sustenance. I do not disagree with that. But if that's going to be the motivating factor, then I think it sort of diminishes your right to be self-righteous about it, because basically you're doing a job. I guess for any further discussion, we'll be meeting on social media and flex from there.
All right. Thank you, James. Raymond?
I think my parting shot is that, look here, activism is not a product. It's not something you pick on a shelf line and say, how much has been put in here and how much is being put out, or how much utility value does it have. That framework of understanding activism is impossible. You cannot, for example, you cannot say the lawyers who are in court today, for example, you can't quantify just how much they've done in terms of expanding the idea of the rule of law. And yet they are in court, they're representing clients, they're going to get paid at the end of the day. You also cannot package it, because people have ideas are pursued differently. If you have a business idea, you pursue someone that can fund the idea, and then you give them an allotment of shares, and then once the idea is successful, you share in the profit according to the share line. Activism is not that. You can't, if I believe in the freedom of expression and someone else believes in the freedom of expression and says, can we work together to try and expand maybe the rights of journalists within Uganda, the quantifiable metric is not something that capitalism can imagine. And so there's an intersection there that many activists realize, that the work that they're doing is not quintessential capitalism. And because it's not quintessential capitalism, they are willing to take far less money sometimes, or far more money, as James thinks there is, I don't know how much you'd be paying someone who's a graduate lawyer and a graduate journalist to walk on the street. I don't know how you quantify that also. So that framework is not helpful. It's really not helpful. And what I would invite people like James to do is to say, let's look into the framework that these activists are operating from, which is a separate political framework from this one, from capitalism, and try and understand when people want the human dignity accorded to people like Aaron Kiza, what is it that they mean? What is it at their hearts that makes them yearn for that kind of human dignity that allows for a lawyer to be free to practice the law when they know they can get into a court and get out of it? What dignity can you give a person like Kiza Besigye, who's been an opposition activist within Uganda's political space for years? And you can't quantify that dignity. You really can't. So that's the framework within which I say, it's separate and different. But the other thing that I'd like to say, and I kept saying this to many people, is that people shouldn't shy away from talking. You shouldn't shy away from talking. I don't consider Onen an adversary, ever. We might disagree, but he's not my adversary. Will not stab each other. There are many people I disagree with, and there are many areas in which we agree with, and we say, okay, we will pursue the areas in which we agree with and leave the ones we disagree with. Mm-hmm. Infinitely, humans are capable of massive disagreement and massive agreement. My 3-year-old daughter does not agree with me on what time I switch off the TV in the house. Perfectly well within her rights to say, Daddy, this TV should be on till 10 p.m. and I should watch it. I'm well within my rights as the parents also say, maybe grab a book, go and sleep. And that I'm not adversarial to her. I can recognize that there's an agreement and a disagreement, and that we can talk out that agreement as time goes. It's possible that as time goes, you will win people over to your side. It's possible that you might never win people over to your side. It's possible that some disagreements are infinite. Like I told you, there is a disagreement that's infinite. Is mankind inherently good? Is mankind inherently bad? Plato and Socrates were arguing it, and you'd go to a border stage and you find people arguing it. So it lasted the test of time. So I encourage people to engage in constructive conversation. And I also would like to encourage activists, which is do not listen to any pedestal you're put on. I hear this a lot, for example, in spaces of gender rights activists, where people say, these are now good men, these are now bad men. And you create a pedestal, and that pedestal creates some form of power of its own. But by not listening to that pedestal, then you remain true to yourself. You remain true to the things that you're campaigning for. So I would say that pedestal also needs to be decimated. And also maybe to say, sometimes pick up the phone, because Twitter is 140 characters. It lacks the nuance that you need. It lacks the understanding that you need. Sometimes you do not know the person you're engaging really well. You also don't understand the circumstances that they're in at the moment. And something which could have been a good two-way conversation, like James and I are having, could become very adversarial. And then people make enemies. But at the end of the day, we must find a way to live with each other. And that's really the perfect mean. And the perfect mean, unfortunately, is within the law. So the perfect mean is that place where we say, no matter how many things I wish against James Onen, the law says this, and I will respect it. And I would also urge activists to respect the people who are their critics. I might ridicule James, but I respect him. I respect his intelligence a lot, which is why even in my ridicule, I was smart about it. I could have done all other forms and manner of ridicule. But that paying respect to people you disagree with is humanizing them. It's the first form of activism, to see that someone on the other side of the argument is actually a human being like you. And this is what the people who are in positions of power do not see, that when you have power, you are as human as the next man. If you order your soldiers to push someone's car off the road because your convoy is going, you're not, when you get to your office, whatever job you do, whether you're the Chief Justice, the President of the country, you're not more important than a guy who was waking up to go and sweep. You all have dignity in the way that you live. And unfortunately for us, we live in a capitalist world, so people derive their dignity from how much money they earn. I hope that can change with time. until it changes, here we are. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Raymond. Thank you, James. I appreciate you just having this conversation.
Yeah.
I was saying.
Oh, I forgot to thank. There's a mutual friend. I won't mention his name, but our mutual friend is responsible for this because someone picked up the phone and said, "Raymond, I know you. I know James Onen. I know that the two of you are capable of having a conversation. Please have a conversation with each other." And I am thankful to him because I'm sure he came from a very good place. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, mutual friend, as well. We appreciate it. I really do feel that this was a good conversation. I feel I understand what you were saying a lot better now. I think like you're one of those people who it's easy to perceive as just being provocative. Like it's easy to read your tweets and think, is he provoking someone? But hearing you speak, it's like, okay, I see some things. You may disagree with them, you may agree with them, but like I get it. I get some of that, I think that was
I tend to send him a gift of a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature to cure his cynicism. It may not do everything, but it might cure. Yes, it might restore faith in humanity. Yeah.
Okay, I see a bromance growing. Love to see it.
And to our, I should say, I mean, I hate to use the word fans, but there's people on both sides of the argument. People who agree more with him and others who agree more with me. I think a lot of the bickering is taking place among that crowd also. Hey guys, how about we all come together and learn to respect people on the other side? If anything good's gonna come out of this, I think it should be that.
Well said. And the same to Raymond. I think I remember reading that thread and thinking, this sounds different. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to wait for the conversation to understand why that sounded so different from what I've heard you speak of, but now I get it as well, the angle. So that was helpful as well. Thank you to all of you who have tuned in, who've been part of the conversation. The conversation is not a conversation without you. So for sure, on social media, I have no doubt that we shall continue to talk about it. Thank you again to media.
Thank you, Fiona, for enduring two men.
Thank you.
Mansplaining the world to you at every time.
Overload.
There were things. I can say that there were definitely things to learn, and I can appreciate that part at least. And it's been a pleasure just moderating this conversation. Once again, thank you to everyone that's watching. Thank you, Media Challenge Initiative, MCI Hub, which has hosted us in this space, Switch Africa, RX Radio, and Kama Digital Content Hub. We appreciate you for making this happen. And I would like to say we'll see you next time, but who knows? Maybe. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
All right.